In this video, we're looking at the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 Generation 3 audio interface. We'll look at the unit, register it, set it up, check out the features, and record. Here's what's included. You'll get the unit, a power cable that's about 80 inches long, and a USB-C to USB-A cable that's about 39 inches long. If you want to use a USB-C to USB-C cable, you'll need to purchase that separately, and I'll have a link in the description below of the USB-C cable that I use. You'll also get a collection of software and plugins when you register the unit. The Scarlett 18i8 Gen 3 looks and feels like quality when you touch it. It has an all-metal chassis with the Focusrite logo on top, and on the bottom, you'll find your serial number, and there are 4 rubber feet to keep the unit in place. On the front, you have 4 combo inputs. You can use 1/4-inch cables for instruments or line-level devices, and XLR cables for microphones. Inputs 1 and 2 are mic, line, or instrument level, and inputs 3 and 4 are mic or line level. And that essentially means you'd plug your guitar or bass into inputs 1 or 2 and not 3 or 4. Although if you have very high output active pickups, you could technically plug your guitar or bass into inputs 3 or 4 as well. And no, active pickups are not line level, but they can have higher output and they have significantly lower impedance. To switch between instrument or line level on inputs 1 and 2, open the included Focusrite Control software and make your selection. If using an XLR cable, these settings will have no effect. The input will automatically be set for mic level, and this applies to all 4 front inputs individually. The 4 mic preamps have 56 dB of gain, and that will be enough for most microphones. I've used a Shure SM7B with this unit and it worked pretty well. However, with gain-hungry microphones like the Shure SM7B, which perform best with 60 to 70 dB of gain, you may want to invest in a Cloudlifter type device to give yourself an extra 20 to 25 dB of clean gain. And we'll have links below for those, and I would suggest that you get one if you're going to be using mics like the Shure SM7B. The preamps sound great. They are clean, low noise, natural, and detailed. Plus, you have the Air feature, which models the frequency response of the classic Focusrite ISA mic preamps. It adds detail and clarity on the top end and works great for vocals and even podcasting. But you can also use it with instruments like guitar, for example. You can turn Air on and off per input by using the button in the Focusrite Control software. This is the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 with the Shure SM7B, and right now Air is turned off. Again, Air is turned off. Now Air is turned on here on the Focusrite 18i8 using the Shure SM7B. Again, Air is turned on, Air is turned off, Air is turned off, Air is turned on, Air is turned on. If you're using condenser microphones or a Cloudlifter type device, you can turn on phantom power in pairs. So if you only need phantom power for input 3, it can be off for inputs 1 and 2 and on for inputs 3 and 4. To set your input gain, sing, speak, or play your instrument at a level representative of your performance and adjust the gain knob. As you increase the gain, you'll notice the gain halos change from green to yellow to red. Turn the gain up until you see yellow, and then turn it down, ensuring that you're in the green most of the time and any peaks only hit yellow or amber, and you never get into the red. If you hit red, that means you're clipping and it will ruin your audio. You can also change the gain halo colors in Focusrite Control. If your input source has a very high level and you keep clipping, you can engage the -10 dB pad in the Focusrite Control software. Then you have a monitor knob, which controls the total output volume, and you can select which rear outputs it controls in the Focusrite Control software. And all of these knobs feel great, with smooth travel and just the right amount of resistance, which helps in setting levels. If you have two pairs of studio monitors plugged into the line outputs on the rear, you can use the Alt function to switch between pairs to check your mix on different speakers. Activate speaker switching in Focusrite Control, and click the Alt button to switch between pairs. In our case, that would mean we can hear our mix through our black monitors plugged into outputs 1 and 2, and then switch to the white monitors that are plugged into outputs 3 and 4. With speaker switching off, you could set up Focusrite Control to output sound to both pairs of monitors at the same time, if you wish. If you have MIDI gear plugged into the rear, you'll see the LED flash on the front when MIDI data is received. The USB LED will be green when the unit is connected and recognized by your computer. You have two headphone outputs with individual volume knobs, and you can customize the mix going to each output with the Focusrite Control software. Overall, the headphone amp is pretty good, rather loud, and will work for most people. But if you are using professional headphones with very high ohms that are difficult to drive, and you have the volume knob cranked but it's not quite loud enough, remember, you have an extra 6 dB per channel you can access in Focusrite Control. On the rear of the unit, you have 4 line level inputs. The inputs are balanced and the gain is not adjustable. You would plug things like the output of a mixer, output of another audio interface, or an external effects unit into these inputs. Then your 4 line outputs, and this is where you would connect your studio monitors or to drive outboard gear. And again, these are the outputs you can control with the main volume knob, and you can set that up in Focusrite Control. You have a MIDI input and output port for gear that requires them, although most MIDI gear today will be connected with USB directly to your computer. There's your USB-C port. Since this is a USB 2.0 device, be sure to plug into a USB 2 or USB 3 port on your computer. I actually use a USB-C 3.1 port with a USB-C to USB-C cable that I purchased separately. This is a Kensington security slot, so you can secure the unit to a structure if needed. The optical input uses a Toslink connector to give you up to 8 more channels of digital audio in ADAT format, and it can be used as an SPDIF input if you have gear with an optical SPDIF output. And of course, you would set this up in Focusrite Control. You might use the optical input for an external mic preamp, for example. You have SPDIF input and output. Here's where you connect your power supply, meaning this unit is not USB bus powered and you must plug it into an outlet. And the power switch is here on the rear. The 18i8 Gen 3 also has Loopback built in. You can use Loopback to record computer audio into your DAW or send DAW audio out into OBS, for example. Loopback makes it easy to stream, podcast, or create DAW plugin review videos for YouTube. If you are buying an audio interface in the year 2021 or beyond, make certain it has Loopback. You are going to need it. Now we'll register the unit and get our drivers. You could do this manually, but let's use the guided method. Connect the power supply and USB cable to the unit and plug them in. Then turn on the 18i8. The first time you turn on the unit, it will be in storage mode and will appear as a disk drive on your computer. Click into it and open the Getting Started link. Then all you have to do is follow the prompts. You can also just get your essential software here, but I want to register the unit. And I already have an account, so I'll log in, but if you don't, just follow the prompts that work for you. Since we are registering with the guided method, our serial number is already filled in, but if you ever need it, you can always find it on the bottom of the unit. Fill in your date of purchase and where you bought it. Now we'll get Focusrite Control, and this will include any needed drivers. If you get mixed up, everything is explained on this page. Go ahead and install Focusrite Control. And then restart your computer. Once your computer restarts, the registration process will pick back up where you left off. And first we'll click OK on this prompt to take the 18i8 out of MSD mode so it functions the way we want and it will no longer show as a disk drive on your computer. But you should also be aware that your computer probably automatically switched the audio playback engine for Windows to the 18i8. And that just means all Windows sound will come out of the Scarlett and not your computer speakers. You can leave this setting as it is or switch it back to the previous setting, which is usually Realtek for computers or laptop speakers. Just understand that Windows can have a separate audio engine from your DAW's audio engine. And that means I could hear YouTube and Windows Media Player through my computer or laptop speakers and hear the output of Studio One through the 18i8. Or hear everything, meaning all computer sounds, browsers, media players, YouTube, etc., and your DAW through the 18i8. But you must understand that any audio playing through the 18i8 will not be heard through speakers plugged into your computer or through laptop speakers. You will only hear the audio if you connect speakers or headphones directly to the 18i8 unit. So let's click OK, and the Scarlett will restart, and we'll continue with the setup. Just follow the prompts. You'll find several videos along the way. Be sure to watch them if you need further guidance. Once again, select the option that works for you and watch the video if needed. Your 18i8 will come with a couple free DAWs, and they will guide you through the installation. By the way, anyone can get Pro Tools First for free at any time over at the Avid website. I already have a DAW, so I don't need these. If you need any further help getting set up, you can choose to watch more videos, but we'll move on. Check out the Focusrite Control video if you want. Follow more prompts. Check out more videos. And let's go to our account. There's our 18i8. You can grab the PDF user guide right here. If you ever need to go through the getting started guide again and rewatch the videos, you can do so right here. If you need Focusrite Control and the drivers, you can get them here. And you can access your bundled software and plugins here. Exactly what you see may differ, and new free plugins are added to the plugin collective every couple of months. Install everything, install just a couple plugins, whatever you prefer. It's very straightforward. And you're done. The 18i8 is registered, the drivers are installed, you can open and use Focusrite Control, and you're ready to record. Now we'll check out Focusrite Control to get an understanding of how to use it. You can open Focusrite Control from the shortcut on your desktop, from the Start menu, or from the tray. Click the Focusrite app and choose Mixing Routing. We'll start with Output Routing. Focusrite Control will allow you to set up different mixes for each physical output. You can set up your no latency direct monitor mix for each input and output, and the blend of playback from your DAW. One of the most important things to understand about custom mixes is that they do not affect what's actually going into the DAW or playing in the DAW. So you're not going to mess up your DAW mix. This is just for monitoring and routing, of course. An example would be if a guitar is plugged into input 1, we have our input gain set, we select the input in our DAW, and we want to use a guitar amp plugin. In that case, we don't need to hear the direct monitor of the guitar, which of course would be the dry guitar, because we only want to hear the output of the DAW and not a blend of the two. So you can turn down the volume of the direct guitar in Focusrite Control, and we still have the same input level in Pro Tools. And then when you play your guitar, you'll only hear the amp plugin. In this case, you could also just choose Playback 1-2 for your monitor outputs and achieve the same thing. Another example would be an acoustic guitar player using Headphone Output 1 and a vocalist using Headphone Output 2, and they're going to record at the same time. The mic for the guitar is plugged into input 3, the mic for the vocalist is plugged into input 4, and the gain is already set. The guitar player wants to hear more of themselves in their headphones, and the vocalist wants to hear more of themselves in their headphones. To avoid confusion, you may want to label the headphones with the names of the musicians, but we'll name headphone 1 guitar and headphone 2 vocals. We'll also name the inputs guitar and vocals. Set the source for headphone 1 and 2 to custom mix. Select headphone 1 and raise the level of the guitar mic. And perhaps lower the level of the vocal just a bit so the guitar player can hear themselves better. You can also mute or solo inputs. And if you want to default a fader to 0, just double click. If you want to center a pan control, just double click. Select headphone 2 and adjust input 4 until the vocalist is satisfied.
Never faded by the lights or the dark.
If the guitar is too loud for the singer, you can turn down the input. And if the drums playing in the DAW are also too loud for the vocalist, you can turn down the DAW playback level here. Since we're using the direct monitor for our microphones, which is a no latency, you'd also want to mute the input channels in your DAW while recording to avoid doubling. This is what doubling sounds like. Not very good. Mute our input, and now we hear ourselves with no latency. Also, if you're using live microphones in the same room as your speakers, be sure to turn down the volume of the monitor output or mute it in Focusrite Control. Otherwise, you'll create a feedback loop. Then, when you check the mix for headphone 1 and headphone 2, you can see they are different for each output. Of course, you don't have to set up custom mixes for each output. If you only want to use the mixer in your DAW or record using plugins live, of course you can always add plugins later. Just set the source for your outputs to Playback DAW 1.2. Or, as an example, if your DAW is using output 5.6 for a track or mix, you could select that in Focusrite Control. If you only want to hear an input or route it, you could choose hardware input and select the pair you want. If you wanted a single channel, just turn off stereo on the output. When on custom mix, if you need to see more input channels, click the plus and add them in mono or stereo, or remove them, or click the X to remove. And you can do the same for software DAW playback. 1.2 will be sufficient for most cases, but if you have a different output in your software, you can add that here. If you come to edit, you can copy and paste mixes. Under File, you can load pre-made output presets. And you can save and recall your own snapshots or presets, so you only need to set something up once. You can also dim your monitors, which will lower the volume so you can talk to someone without stopping playback, or check your mix at a lower level without adjusting the volume knob. You can mute outputs. And if you're ever confused about what something does in Focusrite Control, look down here in the information section. Whenever you hover over a control, it will tell you exactly what it does here. On the input settings, you can do things like switch between line and instrument level, turn on air, and apply a minus 10 dB pad. Click the gear icon and you can do things like change sample rate, set clock source, enable speaker switching, which we already looked at, set which outputs the monitor knob controls, retain 48V, which just means if this option is enabled and you have phantom power on. When you turn the 18i8 off and back on, phantom power will automatically be how you left it. Change your SPDIF source if your SPDIF gear is using a Toslink cable, and even change the color of your gain halos. You also have retain 48V and sample rate under device, and help will take you to the help section of the Focusrite website. Now we'll check out how to record in a DAW. First, we'll record a microphone, and then we'll look at how to record a guitar using amp plugins. If you haven't done so yet, go ahead and connect studio monitors and/or headphones to the 18i8 so you can hear when recording and playing back. The first step for any DAW is to make sure the 18i8 is the playback device. And how you do this depends on the DAW you are using. In Pro Tools, go to Setup, Playback Engine, and make sure the Focusrite USB audio driver is selected. Then you may need to default your I/O so you have the proper inputs and outputs listed in Pro Tools. Go to Setup, I/O, and on the Input tab, choose Default. On the Output tab, choose Default, and on the Bus tab, choose Default. If your inputs and outputs still are not correct, go back to Setup, I/O, and on the Outputs tab, select all of the outputs and delete the path. Then default it again. You may need to do this for the Inputs tab and Bus tab as well. Once you're done, if you have existing tracks, you'll need to set the output of those to output 1, 2. And our inputs look good as well, so we're ready to record in Pro Tools. If you were using Studio One, you can select your audio interface on the start page and set the audio device to Focusrite USB. Create a new song, add some tracks, and if you check your inputs, you may only have inputs 1 and 2 available. If you want to use the other inputs, we can add those in Audio I/O Setup. Add them in stereo, mono, or both. Name them if you want. And you can do the same thing on the Outputs tab if you need to, but most people will leave this to just 1, 2. You can make this the default I/O as well for Studio One, so every new song will have these settings automatically. Hit OK, check your inputs, and now we have the inputs available that we want, and we're ready to record in Studio One. This process will be different but similar for all DAWs. And depending on the DAW, you may not have to do any of this, especially if it's your only audio interface. I, on the other hand, switch between several different audio interfaces, so if you're like me, it's a good idea to export your I/O settings for each interface and DAW, so that way you can import them later and get right to work with no setup. Let's record a microphone, and we'll use Pro Tools. We already have the 18i8 as our playback device, and the I/O is set up from the previous chapter, so we're ready to go. First, turn down your monitor volume, since we'll be using a microphone in the same room as our speakers, and we don't want to create a feedback loop. Let's use input 4, and since this is a condenser microphone, we'll turn on phantom power, In Pro Tools, create a mono audio track. Select Input 4. Input monitor the track, and you should see the input. Put on your headphones, turn up the volume, and open Focusrite Control. Select the headphone output, and I want a custom mix. If you're following along, you probably hear a doubling effect, and that's because we hear the direct, no latency monitor of the 18i8 and the output of Pro Tools. This is what doubling sounds like. Not very good. Mute our input, and now we hear ourselves with no latency. There's many ways to deal with this depending on what you're trying to do, but normally you'll just mute the input in your DAW. And now we hear ourselves with no latency. Adjust the input gain, make sure you're not clipping. Set your headphone volume. If you need even more volume to hear yourself, remember you have that extra 6 dB in Focusrite Control. If you have other tracks playing in your DAW, you can adjust the volume of the DAW level in your headphones here. Again, we already have our speakers turned down, but you could also use the mute in Focusrite Control. Record enable the track, and hit record. This is recording a microphone with the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8. There are no plugins at all on this audio, so you're just hearing the microphone and you can really hear the clarity and detail of the preamps. And that's it. You can then mix and add plugins to produce your track. But if you're going to switch from headphones to speakers, remember, before you play back, in order to prevent a feedback loop, you could turn off phantom power if it's a condenser mic, or turn down the gain, turn off the monitor in your DAW, and mute the direct input for your monitor outputs. If you instead want to record a microphone while hearing plugins, then you'll want to monitor through the DAW. Again, make sure the speakers are turned down. Set up your track, and we will not mute it this time. Add your plugin or plugins. You'll want to make sure your buffer is very low to avoid latency, and you can change the buffer directly in your DAW or the Scarlett settings. Since we're going to listen through the DAW, in Focusrite Control, we can mute the input or blend in the amount of the dry mic that you want to hear and balance with the output of the DAW. But I'll just mute it. You could also change the headphone source to Playback 1.2 and only use the mixer in your DAW, or you could even choose the system playback preset, or load your own snapshot, whatever you prefer. Let's turn on air. Adjust the input gain if you need to. Record enable the track, and record. This is recording a microphone through the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 while using plugins live. If you're new, all of this may seem kind of complicated, and you may think completing all of these steps will take a long time when you just want to record. But really, once you understand how to do this, you can set it all up in under 30 seconds. Now let's check out how to record a guitar with an amp plugin, and we'll use Studio One 5. We already have the 18i8 set up as our playback engine for Studio One from a previous chapter, and since we're going to use an amp plugin and listen through the DAW, make sure your buffer is low to avoid latency, preferably 128 or below. Plug your guitar into input 1 or 2, although with this guitar, since it has active pickups and is very high output, I could plug it into 3 or 4, but I'll use input 1. If you have passive pickups, you'll want to stick to input 1 or 2, since those inputs can be switched to instrument level and are high impedance. In Focusrite Control, go to Input Settings and switch Input 1 to Instrument Level. Again, with this specific active pickup guitar, it could be set to line, but we'll use Instrument Level. And by the way, you're not going to hurt your guitar or interface by switching between these, so experiment if you have an active pickup instrument. You could also turn on air to increase the high-end content of your guitar at input. Experiment with this as well. And since we're not using a microphone in the same room, we can listen through our studio monitors, so you can turn up the volume. I'll grab the amp plugin I want to use, throw it in, and that will create the track for me. I'll set the input to input 1. In Studio One, you can change your tracks to mono or stereo here. Just use what you need for your mix. Record enable the track, and as long as your gain is up, you should hear your guitar and amp plugin. But there's an issue. We can hear the dry guitar input and the amp plugin output. If I turn off the track monitor, then you can hear just the dry guitar input, which in this case is not what we want. Open Focusrite Control, and since we're listening through our studio monitors, select that. It's currently on custom mix, so in this case I can just mute the direct monitor for input 1. Strum your guitar, you'll see the input, but you won't hear anything. Monitor the track, and now you'll only hear the output of the amp plugin. You also have the option of switching from custom mix to playback DAW 1-2, or using the system playback preset, or a snapshot that you created. Before you play or record, be sure to set your input gain properly, strum hard on your guitar like you would while playing, and make sure you're not clipping and hitting red. Stay in the green with any peaks only hitting yellow. And really you could stay between -18 and -8 to give yourself plenty of headroom. And now you're ready to play, practice, or record. If you'd like to play along with drums or any other instrument, drag in some audio files or a drum virtual instrument plugin, set up your MIDI track, and play or record. Now we'll check out the Focusrite Device Settings app, and this is different from Focusrite Control. You can access the app from your tray or your start menu, but we'll use the tray. And there are some important settings in here concerning the inputs and outputs Windows and non-DAW apps we'll see. Click the icon, and at the top you can open the 18i8 settings window, and this will tell you your firmware version, driver, serial number. You can change the sample rate here, and as we know, we can also change the sample rate in Focusrite Control, and you can set the sample rate in your DAW when creating a new session. No matter where you change the sample rate, these will all be the same. You can change your buffer. Normally when recording, you will have a low buffer for less latency, and then raise the buffer when mixing to avoid pops, clicks, and playback errors once you start adding more plugins and virtual instruments, which can be taxing to the CPU. You can also change your buffer in your DAW, of course. And select your clock source, just as you can in Focusrite Control. Back to the tray, choose Mixing Routing to open Focusrite Control. If Show Notifications is checked, you'll get an alert when a setting is changed. And now we get to two very important options: the Expose Hide Windows Channels and Windows Sound Panel. Open the Expose Hide Windows Channels. By default, Windows and non-ASIO or non-DAW apps won't have access to all of the inputs and outputs of the 18i8. Now let's open the Windows Sound panel. Under the Playback tab, we only have the speaker output, which is the physical 1 and 2, and under the Recording tab, which is the physical inputs and loopback, we only have analog 1 and 2. What this means is if I wanted to use input 3 for a microphone directly within a non-ASIO app like Skype, Zoom, or OBS, for example, for a live stream, we don't have the input. Or if I wanted to use the 3.4 output for VLC Media Player, I don't have the output. So any physical input, loopback, or physical output I want to be able to use with non-ASIO apps will have to be manually exposed to Windows first. But understand, this is only for non-ASIO apps. You will still have full access to all inputs and outputs in your DAW, even if you don't expose the channels to Windows, as you can see here in Pro Tools or Studio One. So let's expose inputs 3.4, loopback, and outputs 3.4. We'll open Windows Sound Panel again, and under Playback, we have our outputs. Under Recording, we have our inputs. Back in OBS, we can now select input 3.4 for the mic plugged into input 3. And since we're just using one input, we set it to mono. For the DAW output, choose our loopback source. And it works. Go back to VLC, and now we can set the output to 3.4, or we can even set the output of Windows to 3.4 if you wanted to. If you're not hearing any output, just head into Focusrite Control, and you can try the direct routing preset. Or set up a custom mix, making sure you add the proper software playback channel, and set up your mix. You could have your DAW playing through output 1 and 2, and VLC or something else playing through output 3 and 4 if you ever needed to do that for some reason. You could route a microphone directly into OBS with 0 latency and a guitar into your DAW, and then take the output of your DAW and route it into OBS through Loopback and stream all of that on YouTube, or route your mic through the DAW instead and use Plugins Live and route that into OBS with Loopback. Once you expose the channels you need to Windows and set up your mix if needed in Focusrite Control, the 18i8 becomes a monster audio interface. Between the unit itself and Focusrite Control, it's an incredibly flexible way to work. Now we'll check out how to use Loopback. And Loopback has many possible uses, but we'll look at two. And that is recording non-ASIO audio into a DAW and sending your DAW ASIO audio out into something like OBS for live streaming or recording a plugin demo video. The first example is recording audio from a video playing in our browser into our DAW. For this example, we need the playback engine for Windows to be the 18i8. So be sure you have speakers Focusrite USB audio selected. Our DAW is also using the 18i8 as the playback engine. On a stereo audio track, set the input to loop 1-2 and mute the track. Now, you must mute the track before playback. Otherwise, you'll get a nasty feedback loop. By default, Focusrite Control should be set up properly. But if this isn't working for you, pop into it, select the Loopback output, and make sure the source is set to Playback DAW 1-2. And this is because outputs 1-2 are the audio outputs we're using for Windows. In your DAW, record enable the track, hit record, and play the video. And the audio will be recorded. The next example is taking audio playing in your DAW and routing it out into another app like OBS or Streamlabs. And OBS and Streamlabs are both free. We'll use Streamlabs this time, but the settings will be identical in OBS and most other screen recording and streaming software. The 18i8 is of course the playback engine for our DAW, and the playback engine for Windows doesn't have to be the 18i8, but it can be if you want. In Focusrite Control, the loopback source is set to Playback 1-2 because our DAW main output is the 1 and 2 output. And this is the default setting for most DAWs and the default setting in Focusrite Control. So unless you changed something, you won't have to mess with this part at all. In Streamlabs, in case you don't have a display capture, add that so you can capture your screen. Add a new source. Name it. Choose the proper screen if you have multiples. Then we need to add our loopback source for our DAW output. Add a source. We want an audio input capture. Add the source. We want a new source. Name it DAW audio. Add the source. Under device, choose loopback left right. Focusrite USB audio. And remember, as we covered in the 18i8 Inputs, Outputs in Windows section, the loopback channels have to be manually exposed to Windows. So if you're not seeing the loopback inputs, come to your Focusrite Settings app, expose hide Windows channels, and be sure you have the loopback inputs checked. Once you do, they'll be available to all non-ASIO Windows apps. Click Done in Streamlabs, and there's our source. You could add more audio sources if you want, like you could add a microphone directly into Streamlabs, so it's separate from your DAW audio source, which is useful if you're recording a video and want to edit the audio later. Or you could run the mic through your DAW, and that would be combined in your DAW audio source since it's running through the DAW. Any audio running through the DAW will be captured in the DAW audio track in Streamlabs. So you could live stream a guitar performance with amp plugins, stream a vocal performance with plugins, podcast and playback audio clips when needed, etc., etc. Everything, including plugins, will be output to Streamlabs or OBS or whatever you happen to be using. You could also add a webcam. And there's plenty more you could do in here, but let's say we're good. Now just run audio through your DAW, and it's all routed into Streamlabs. And you're ready to go live or record a video. The Loopback implementation in the 18i8 Gen 3 and Focusrite Control is among the best I've used. Not only is it very flexible, but Focusrite has come up with an elegant solution to avoid sample rate mismatches, which often cause problems for people not aware. But with the 18i8, when you set your sample rate, it will be set for all inputs and outputs. And that just means you won't have to come into your Windows sound panel, find an output or input, click Properties, Advanced, and manually change the sample rate to match your non-ASIO application. It's all done for you. But a few things to note. Since the inputs are seen as pairs in Windows, if you happen to be using a single input, we'll say 3, for a microphone run directly into Streamlabs, OBS, etc., you'll want to downmix that input to mono. Otherwise, your voice will be on one side. Welcome to the plugin review live stream. Let's check out this new plugin. Huh? Why are you guys calling me Lefty? Oh, hold on a second. I have to downmix this mic to mono. There we go. So now you should be hearing me properly. Let's get on with our live stream. You could do this in Windows if you have to by going to the sound panel, recording tab, find your input, properties, advanced, and switch to one channel. But usually it's easier to do this in Streamlabs or OBS or whatever program you are using. All you need to do is open your advanced sound settings and downmix your mic to mono. Another thing to be aware of is you don't necessarily need to use Playback DAW 1.2 as your source for loopback in Focusrite Control, although Playback 1.2 will be what you want the majority of the time. You could also use these other options if you have audio routed to them. Or you could set up a custom mix and have different inputs routed directly to the loopback. Control the DAW volume going into OBS. And have a different monitoring mix for your headphones and speakers, for example. There's a lot more you could do with Focusrite Control and Loopback. And the last thing is, if you have the 18i8 speakers selected as the Windows playback device, and your DAW output is also 1.2, which is the default, then your DAW audio track in Streamlabs or OBS will contain audio from both Windows WDM apps and the ASIO audio stream from your DAW. Also, if your desktop audio track is enabled, this will be duplicate audio from Windows, since we're already capturing Windows sounds in the DAW audio track, again because we have the 18i8 as our Windows playback device. You could just turn this down, mute it, or disable it in settings. Having Windows sounds and DAW sounds on the same track is not a big deal for streaming because it's actually probably what you want. But if you're recording a video and you want to edit the audio later, then you'll want separate tracks. So if you're playing Windows audio and you need it on its own track, be sure to change the playback engine for Windows to something else. You'll also have to set up these separate tracks by going to your advanced audio settings and make sure each source is being recorded on a separate track. And then go to Settings, Output, Advanced, Recording, and select all the audio tracks you want to record. There's actually way more you can do with Loopback and Focusrite Control. It's really an indispensable feature. Once you have an audio interface with Loopback, you will never buy one that doesn't have it. And Focusrite has done a really great job with their implementation of Loopback. We didn't specifically cover using SPDIF or ADAT because the vast majority of people will never use them. But if you do use SPDIF or SPDIF, as people call it, or ADAT, then you already know what to do since SPDIF and ADAT are standards. The setup will be the same for any audio interface, and you can route in Focusrite Control. Just understand if you happen to have an external SPDIF unit, you can connect it here. And use the inputs in your DAW, for example, or send audio out. Or if you have something like an external ADAT mic preamp, you can add up to 8 more mic inputs, say to record a full drum kit, using the 4 mic inputs on the 18i8 and the 8 mic inputs on your external mic preamp. Exactly how you set this up will depend on the external gear you are using and if you're sending audio in or sending audio out. But in general, you'll need to do 2 things. Match your sample rates and set the clock source on both units. The clocks will be the same and the settings will be opposite. Meaning, for example, with the ADAT mic preamp set to internal, you'd set the 18i8 to ADAT in Focusrite Control, so they are using the same clock. So that's the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 Gen 3, a monster audio interface in a relatively small desktop design. It has 4 great mic preamps, the air feature, 2 headphone outputs, 4-line inputs, 4-line outputs, speaker switching, SPDIF, ADAT, and Loopback. Plus, with Focusrite Control, you have the flexibility to route things however you want. So if you're looking for a new audio interface, and if it fits your needs, then the 18i8 is worth considering. That's the Focusrite Scarlett 18i8 Gen 3.